What up, good people? It's me, Johnny, back at it again with another video. And, I recently read about a rumor that if you are a DC fan and you want to see James Gunn make the DCEU great at last, I really can't say great again because the DCEU, especially since 2016, has never been great. But the rumor that I actually read about is that Henry Cavill might be brought back to play a version of Superman called Red Sun, and I, for one, am all for it. Henry, in my opinion, was the best Superman actor out of all the Superman actors that has played him so far, in my humble opinion. So this would be a huge, and I do mean a huge win, in my opinion, for James Gunn's new DCEU, and it will give the fans what we want, that being Henry Cavill back playing Kal-El, at least this version of Kal-El. In case this rumor comes true, I want to give a character breakdown for this version of Superman according to DC Comics, so when the movie comes out, and if you see it, you'll have an idea of his origin. Before, though, I dive into this, if you're enjoying this content and the content you get from me, please like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell so that way anytime I upload a new video, you will be alerted. Also, if you want additional content from me around a wide range of topics, check out my podcast that can be found anywhere podcasts are being played by searching for the same name as the YouTube page. But without further ado, let me dive into this. So this version of Superman was released as a short comic book series back in 2003, created by Mark Morrell. Since then, an animated movie version of this has been released in February of 2020, I believe. So you might actually see pictures used in the video today about that, but I'm actually just strictly going to base my review of the character based on the comic book story, since a few things in the movie actually changed up the origin a little bit. His story in DC Comics though begins with his parents Jor-El and Laura sending their infant son Kal-El in a rocket ship back into the past due to the Earth being torn apart by tidal stress because of the sun becoming a red giant. Now, for anyone that doesn't know what a red giant is, let me nerd out real quick and tell you. So, a red giant is a dying star, typically a sun, that in its final stages of evolution explodes into a supernova that ends up being either a neutron star or a black hole. So, yeah, not good news for surrounding planets, but to get back to the story at hand, his parents sent Kal-El into the past thinking this would actually spare him. Now, unlike the main story, where he ends up landing in Kansas, his ship actually ends up landing in a Ukrainian collective in 1938, causing a sort of a predestination paradox. More on that later, though. Fast forward a few years, and during the Cold War, the Soviet Union basically brought him out as their trump card, which actually changed the war on its head. You see, the Cold War, when fought, was basically about making sure that countries like the USSR, for example, didn't get their hands on nuclear weapons, or at the very least, making sure that your country have the most, depending on, again, what side you're looking at it from. And I'm just going to say from the United States or the United Nations side of things. For my historians that might be listening, I know there's, more moving parts to the Cold War, but let's be honest, that's what it was really about, right? It was about the nukes. Having said that, once the Soviet Union showed that they had a weapon like Superman on their side, the war changed to every country saying, forget nukes, how do we get us a superhuman weapon like they got? This version of Superman was still like we know him to be. He was kind hearted and dedicated to do what was right, except for this time it was just in the name of communism. As you all, could guess, the enemy was the United States and Lex Luthor, who in this timeline was a scientist that worked for the Science and Technology Advanced Research Laboratories, also known in DC Comics as Star Labs. Real quick, Star Labs and DC Comics developed really super advanced technology for a variety of reasons. The most notable tech that was developed there are parts that was used to create Cyborg, for example. Getting back to Superman Red Sun, though, during this timeline, Lex uses a satellite to hurl it at Metropolis as a ploy to lure Superman out to stop it so that Lex could get some of Superman's DNA, which is what ended up happening. Lex then used this DNA to create this Superman clone we know as Bizarro. During a diplomatic party, the leader of the Soviet, Joseph Stalin, was poisoned by his son due to him being jealous of Superman's position. Stalin's son felt that he should actually be in a position to take over if his father died, instead of where really the Soviets wanted Superman or Kal-El to actually take over. Sorry for him though, that plan actually doesn't work as Superman takes control of the Soviet Union, although reluctantly, and transformed it later into a utopia, but that's later on down the line. To backtrack just a little bit, before any of that happens though, Lex finished creating the Superman clone Bizarro, and he sends it to fight Superman in hopes that he would, be able to kill Superman at that diplomatic party. The fight was evenly matched, but during the scrimmage, a nuke was actually set off by accident and was going to basically hit and destroy Great Britain. Although Bizarro isn't Superman, he still has, every one of his traits being his clone, his behaviors as well. And so he goes and sacrifices himself to stop the nuke, but unfortunately, there were still a lot of casualties. In this timeline, the Soviets are the world superpower, as to be expected, with the United States and I believe Chile being the only nations to remain independent for Soviet rule, since in this timeline, yes, the Soviet Union actually won the Cold War. Oh, also, fun fact, which is kind of wild. You know how Superman and Lois have this connection? Well, apparently in this universe, Lois Lane actually marries this Lex Luthor, which is crazy. But anyway, after a highly complex plan by Lex Luthor, he becomes the president of the United States. And through some cunning tactics, he actually tricks Superman into fighting and defeating Brainiac, which he then integrates him into this version of the Fortress of Solitude called the Winter Palace, located in Siberia, as a AI program to help him run the world. A little later on in the story, the Brainiac AI tries to convince Superman to actually invade the United States, but Superman declines at first until Lex actually attacks Superman at the Winter Palace. During this attack on Superman from Lex, he actually decides, and Brainiac does convince him to go ahead and move forward with the invasion of the United States. Doing all of this, he then learns that this was all a setup by Lois, and then he orders Brainiac to stop the invasion, which of course Brainiac declines, which was a part of Lex Luthor's plan. Brainiac then turns and attacks Superman with kryptonite until Lex, who was thought to be dead, actually comes back and actually steps in to shut down Brainiac because he basically took him over. Superman then turns and destroys Brainiac, which, again, Lex actually planned on this happening, and it actually triggered a fail safe self destruct bomb that was attached to Brainiac's ship. Before it actually blew up, Superman flies his ship into outer space, saving the world, but killing him. The story ends with Lex Luthor taking over the world, creating world peace, and curing all diseases, believe it or not, and then becomes this universe's version of Methuselah, living for over 2,000 years. Now, after Lex died several centuries later, we learned that humans, started to explore space to find a planet that would be available for them to live on, since the sun was starting to turn into a red giant, which would destroy the planet. Jor-El and Laura then decided to send their son Kal-El into the past in hopes this would actually save him. Now, if you think you heard this exact line at the start of the story, then you ain't tripping, because that's how the story starts, and ironically, that's how the story ends. It's kind of a self contained story where the end will always also bring about the beginning, or vice versa, which I actually think is a pretty cool concept to a story. One of the, and in my opinion, as far as DC Comics, is actually one of the best DC comic stories out there. Like if I had to list the top 10, it would make the top 10 in my opinion. As far as this version of Superman powers go, I mean, he's really no different than the version of Superman that we get that lands in Kansas. He has super strength, he's super fast, has x ray vision, has heat vision, and frost breath. He has super hearing. Of course, he can fly. He's invincible to any type of physical attacks. He has superhuman stamina, just to name a few of his abilities. Anyway, in DC Comics, when what's called the New 52 came out or became to be, basically that's a reboot of DC. You know, Marvel and DC do this thing where they just reboot the whole storyline every few years. But anyway, in the New 52 came out and it was that reboot that was done in 2011. This story was actually adopted into one of the 52 multiverse realities within the DC universe to make it canon, if you will. But ladies and gents, that's the short version of Red Sun. So I want to know from you guys in the comments, do you want to see Henry come back and play this version of him in a movie role, or just leave him out of the new DCEU entirely? But until the next video, I hope you all have a good day. Take care.